Hey everyone, welcome to Tales in Text, and I'm your host Nisha, and welcome to another episode. So in today's video, I am going to be giving you an update for the Mahabharata readathon. So it's been a while. I think it's been almost 3 months since my previous update, where I basically covered volume 1 and I started volume 2. So as you can see, things are progressing, and I thought I'll just take you through where exactly I am, what I've read so far, and some interesting developments which are different from the versions that I grew up hearing. So I'll try to keep this quick because I don't want to keep the video too long. Yeah, let's get right down to it. So the last time I did my Mahabharata volume 2 review, I had just finished. So I have actually written here the start date was September 2nd, 2022 at 5:02 a.m. and yeah, so and I completed the Adi Parva on October 16th, 2022, and I think it was in November that I gave you an update for this book. So I think I had finished, yep, here you go. I had finished Arjuna Vanavasa Parva, Subhadra Harana Parva, Harana Harika Parva, Kandavadaha Parva in October. This is where Adi Parva ends. And I had started Sabha Parva. I think I had done only like half of Sabha Parva by the time I gave you the previous update. So it's just a tiny minuscule portion. As you can see, 60 pages, around some 70-75 pages of a 400 plus page book. So in the interim, in the past couple of months, here's what I have covered. So right now, this is the position I am in, and I am in the Kairata Parva. So Kairata basically refers to the hunters who live, or tribal people who live on the mountains and who make their living through hunting. And this is the Parva essentially where, for those of you who are familiar with the major themes of the Mahabharata, it's where Arjuna meets Shiva in the form of the Kairata, or the hunter, who humbles him, and it is through Shiva's blessings that Arjuna gets a very important weapon that he ultimately uses in the Kurukshetra war. So in order to get to that, we had to cover Mantra Parva, which was basically the consultation that Yudhishthira has with all of his peers and all of his elders before deciding to conduct the Rajasuya Yagna. And then we had the Jarasandha Vada Parva, where Jarasandha was supposed to be killed in order to make sure that the Pandavas don't have a thorn on their side who will rise up in retaliation if they do conduct the Rajasuya Yagna. Now, interestingly, this Parva, Jarasandha Vada Parva, actually brought up quite a few interesting moral dilemmas, especially about the character of Krishna and also about the Pandavas. Because, we're always told that, because Krishna is a god, he can't do anything wrong, he's always morally correct. And in the very abridged versions of the Mahabharata, we also hear of how the Pandavas are always morally right, and they're the victims, and whatever they do is always on the path of righteousness. So in Jarasandha Vada Parva, Krishna, Bhima and Arjuna, all of them, they disguise themselves and they sort of sneak into Jarasandha's palace, and then they challenge him to a duel while also accepting his hospitality. So it actually defies a lot of the morally accepted rules. For example, how a Kshatriya is supposed to come face to face, like with a lot of courage and bravery, how they're supposed to be real men and face their enemies on the battlefield courageously, and how you are not supposed to basically abuse the hospitality of your host by challenging them to a battle while the hospitality is going on, and how you're basically supposed to represent yourself as who you are rather than wearing the guise of somebody else when you're coming to challenge this person and to basically eliminate this person to take over their throne and their kingdom. So there are a lot of rules that, technically which indicate moral kshatriya behavior, all of which are broken by Krishna, Bhima and Arjuna during the Jarasandha Vadha Parva. So it gives a very nice moral dilemma right off the bat, when we consider how the so-called heroes of the epic also perform immoral acts for a particular purpose. And I know a lot of people say that, it's for the higher good, because if Krishna is involved in something, it is obviously for the higher good. But we have to remember that Krishna functions, at least in the Mahabharata world, with the exception of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a purely philosophical work. Krishna functions as a human and as a king, as someone who is, who was born technically in a very lower caste status, if you actually consider the caste statuses in terms of hierarchy. So he is a man who responds to situation as a man does, or as a human does. So this Jarasandha Vada Parva was actually very interesting for me. Then there's the Digvijaya Parva, because after Jarasandha is killed, his son is instated on the throne, and in return for allowing him to stay alive and to continue retaining his father's kingdom, Jarasandha's son accepts the suzerainty and accepts Yudhishthira as the emperor. And then the Digvijaya Parva is basically about all the military exploits that the Pandava brothers undertake in order to subjugate other kingdoms in Bharatavarsha. And in this Digvijaya Parva, it's actually very interesting to see the extent of India's borders, ancient Indian borders, and what the ancient Indians were aware of in terms of geography. And it's quite a wide area and a very, very vast area, going all the way to the Middle East on one side and very deep into Eastern Asia on the other. So it's a very interesting chapter, Digvijaya Parva, for anyone who is interested in geography. Then there's the Rajasuya Parva, which basically takes us into the Rajasuya, the ceremonies and the sacrifices and the rituals. Of course, it's a very short parva, because there isn't a lot of discussion in terms of the ritual aspect. So it's just a very cursory, it basically like a casual mention that, hey, this ritual is taking place right now. The important, kind of the tension-filled, stressful elements of the Rajasuya Yagna take place in the Arghabhiharana Parva, which is basically where an important person has to be chosen by the new king or the new emperor in order to honor them for their greatness. This could be their age, this could be their military contributions, this could be their wisdom, this could be their divinity. And so Yudhishthira, for whoever who's familiar with the story, chooses or nominates Krishna. And that's when a lot of people, including Shishupala, get really angry, and they feel that Yudhishthira and the Pandavas are being, unfair against the others who have clearly done way more than what Krishna has done, who clearly rank significantly higher in the Kshatriya ladder compared to Krishna, who is after all only a cowherd, or rather has his basis in the Vaishya community, and he isn't really even a true Kshatriya. So that's when the actual stress-filled, tension-filled moment starts. And then we have the Shishupala Vadha Parva, which is honestly pretty similar to the most common narratives of how you would have probably grown up hearing, how Shishupala basically insults absolutely everyone under the sun, calls people's names, really hits below the belt, and then Krishna finally loses his temper and he calls upon the Sudarshana Chakra to behead Shishupala. So this, this parva has been pretty true to what the normal renditions are. And speaking of being true to the popular renditions or popular narratives, while Shishupala's death is pretty much documented and orally presented across the ages in a very consistent way, Jarasandha's death is actually pretty different from what you may have heard growing up. Because when I was growing up, I always heard that how Bhima basically tears Jarasandha apart and throws his body in different directions, and that's how he dies. Now, while that does happen, he doesn't die technically. And there is something else that Bhima does later on that actually does completely finish off Jarasandha for good. So these are really interesting in terms of seeing how the popular narratives that we are aware of today, they kind of digress from the critical edition. Okay, now after Shishupala Vadha is the Dyuta Parva, and this is when things get really nasty, and because this is the infamous game of dice. And this Parva, the Dyuta Parva, actually takes us through the first game of dice that the Pandavas play. Now, if you are, again, like I said, if you're familiar with the story, you will remember that the Pandavas play the game of dice twice. The first time they play this game of dice, and they lose everything, and Dhritarashtra is basically scared by other elders, in the palace, that you are in for a lot of trouble if you don't fix this. And he calls them back and he gives them back all of their wealth, all of their status. And then Duryodhana, Shakuni, Karna and Dushasana get really mad, and then they challenge Yudhishthira once again. They taunt him that he's scared. He was saved by an elder and also saved by a woman, because Draupadi basically wants it's a huge thing. I don't want to give away any spoilers, because I know there's no spoilers technically, because everyone knows about, who's familiar with the Mahabharata knows about Draupadi's humiliation. But it's the way it's been actually written, it's that makes this particular section super interesting. The Anudyuta Parva is where the second game of dice takes place, where once again Yudhishthira loses everything. And I'm just trying to open it up. So I'm just going to show you like a couple of things that I've made a lot of notes in these. Like I said, see, this is the Dyuta Parva. Every page has like tons of notes like this. I've underlined multiple times. As you can see, there's lots and lots of notes in the margins, and it's just, there's a lot that I have written, like over here. And it is in the Dyuta Parva basically where let me just check this out a bit, just to make sure I get my facts right. Right, so it is in the Dyuta Parva itself where Draupadi's humiliation takes place, and she basically tries to save her husbands from that humiliation, and it doesn't work. And again in the Anudyuta Parva, once again, they have the game of dice a second time, and again they lose everything, and that's when they are sent to the forest for 13 years, for 12 years. Is it 13 years? I am so sorry, just give me a minute. 14 years, sorry, 14 years, where 13 years are spent in where they can wander around in the forest as they are. But in the 14th year, they are supposed to live incognito, and if they are found out, then they will basically get into trouble, and they have to once again relive for 13 more years in the forest as punishment for having been found out. So this entire section from so this entire section, as you can see, is the game of dice. I've also written, and it begins, because it's so exciting for me to read this, because this is basically where everything goes downhill for the Pandavas, and that it's the first stone cast in the direction of the war. Now after this we come to the Aranyaka Parva, which is basically the third portion of the 18 Parva classification, right? So these smaller sections that we have, they form within the 100 Parva classification. And there are many translators who actually who kind of divide the Mahabharata Critical Edition into either the 18 Parva classification or the 100 Parva classification. So Vivek Debra has actually used the 100 Parva classification to talk about the smaller segments in each of that is in each of the larger segments, and then there are the larger segments, like for example over here we had the Sabha Parva, which was the second large segment in the 18 Parva classification. The Aranyaka Parva is the third large segment in the 18 Parva classification, and according to the notes that Dr. Debra has provided, Aranyaka Parva is the second longest Parva in the 18 Parva classification. So the Aranyaka Parva basically covers the entire portion of the Pandavas' stay in the forest. And so far, I have read the first section, the Aranyaka Parva, which is the Pandava sojourn in the forest, where we basically take a look at the initial few years of the Pandavas and Draupadi's wanderings in the forest, where they meet a lot of sages, they hear a lot of stories, we get a few descriptions of nature. Of course, the descriptions of nature here in the Aranyaka Parva are not as poetic as if you've read the Ramayana, the critical edition of the Ramayana, and I've done a review of that as well. There, when Rama and Lakshmana are searching for Sita after she's abducted, there's a large chunk in book 2, almost like 60 to 70%, where a lot of the descriptions about the forest are so poetic and so beautiful. But that kind of rasa is not really there in the Aranyaka Parva, because here it's much more about the Mahabharata. What I have seen is that it's much more about collecting of stories from the ancient past, that is ancient to the Pandavas, discussing military stratagems, discussing philosophy and dharma. So the Mahabharata is a very philosophical book, whereas the Ramayana was more earthy and grounded in the physical realm. I hope that kind of makes sense. So I finished this part. Then I finished the Kimira Vadha Parva, where it's basically the killing of the demon Kimira. I know the demon is not a very Indian word technically, but the Kimira Vadha basically kills Kimira, who was a Rakshasa. And it's about how they meet Kimira, why they have to kill him. And it's a short parva, very exciting, interesting, and yeah. Here, this is the section where Kimira's description is mentioned, right? So here they've given he's Baka's brother, and so that's why in the book 1, Baka is killed by Bhima. He's the Rakshasa who who eats people, who used to eat people and take them as payment for allowing people to stay, the people in the village to stay in peace, if you remember that. It's the time when the Pandavas and their mother Kunti basically pose as Brahmana boys and stay in the house of a Brahmin family. And in order to save that family and to thank them for their hospitality, Bhima goes in the place of one of the family members, when that family is selected by Baka to give a tribute from their family. And so that's the Bakavada. It's in the book 1. So Kirmira Vadha Parva is about Baka's brother Kirmira and how he's killed. And finally, it brings me to section 31, Kairata Parva, where basically it's essentially about Arjuna meeting Shiva in the form of a Kairata. But right now, I'm still in the beginning stages of the Kairata Parva, where we are still looking at some of the experiences that they've been having on the mountains, and again a lot of philosophical discussions with between Krishna and the Pandavas, Krishna and Draupadi, in terms of the nature of sorrow, in terms of the nature of problems. Krishna also talks of his fight with the king of Saubha. The names are literally, in my head, all kind of just mixing up because I've been reading this so constantly. Yeah, Shalva city Saubha. So Krishna talks about how his fight with Shalva took place and why he was not present during the game of dice, when he could have actually saved them, but he couldn't. So that's basically where I am right now. The Kairata Parva is still pretty long, as you can see over here. I am trying to find the end. So I have another at least 60 pages to go before this parva is done, and then finally I'll be at the Indra Lokabhigamana parva, where basically Arjuna goes to meet his father Indra in heaven. And this is the parva where basically he meets Urvashi, and she curses him to be a eunuch because he kind of refuses to sleep with her, right? So the starting section of this parva is there in this book. There's the first half of this parva, and then we'll be moving on to book 3. So essentially I have another 150 pages left to finish volume 2. So I think I should be done in the next month. Because right now I'm just reading like 2 to 3 pages per day, just to make sure that I keep committed to it. But I just cannot find myself to read any more than this, because whenever I'm forcing myself to read this more, I kind of fall off the wagon for many days. So I've decided my goal is to just read 2 to 3 pages of this daily, and that's good enough for me. And I know it's gonna take many more years until I finish the entire Mahabharata series, but that's all right. You know what, I'm gonna be a little patient. And if anybody's following these updates and these reviews, I'm sorry, but you'll have to be patient too. All right, so yeah, I think with this I will wrap up the Mahabharata update video. If you have been reading these books, do let me know which point you are in right now, or if you want to pick these up, let me know. Yeah, if you're going to be starting this. Now, if you want links to the versions of the critical edition translations, not just in English but in many Indian languages, I will put up a link to my very first introduction video for the critical edition readathon, and you can go check that out. And yeah, that's it. You can go find the links and just purchase your books or download the free materials online and get started. Alright, if you stuck around with me so far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next episode of Tales and Texts. Bye bye.